They thought their children signing those papers was just smart estate planning. But what Margaret and Robert really signed away was everything they owned. Their home of 47 years stolen by their own blood, leaving them with nothing but shame and a tiny apartment they could barely afford. But hidden in the mountains of Oregon, buried beneath an old hermit's cabin they inherited from an uncle they barely knew, was a stone vault containing $285 million in gold, gems, and secrets that would make their betrayers wish they had never been born. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and regret. Margaret sat at the small formica table in the cramped apartment, her hands trembling as she held the eviction notice. 68 years old, married for 47 years, and now sitting in a 400-square-foot box that wasn't even theirs anymore. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing. The carpet was stained with decades of other people's lives, and the window overlooked a dumpster and a chain-link fence. Her husband Robert stood by the sink, his back to her, shoulders slumped in a way she had never seen before. 70 years old, a retired machinist who had worked 52 years without missing a day, and now he could not even look his wife in the eye. Not because he was ashamed of her, but because he was ashamed of himself. Ashamed he had trusted their children. Ashamed he had believed family meant something. It had been 8 months since they signed the papers. 8 months since their son Daniel showed up with a lawyer and a folder full of documents. He had smiled that easy smile, the one he used when he wanted something. Told them it was just estate planning, smart tax stuff, protecting the family home so when they passed, everything would be easier for everyone. Patricia had nodded along, his sister, arms crossed, acting like she cared. Stephen, the youngest, barely looked up from his phone but mumbled something about how this was the right move. Margaret had hesitated. Something in her gut had whispered no. But Robert had looked at Daniel, his firstborn, the boy he had taught to ride a bike and change a tire and be a man, and he had signed. So Margaret signed too. 3 weeks later, the house was sold. 47 years of memories, of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and anniversary dinners, gone. Sold to a young couple with a baby and a golden retriever. Margaret and Robert were given 30 days to vacate. When Margaret called Daniel crying, begging him to explain, he had sighed like she was bothering him. "Mum, you signed the papers. It's done. We got a good price. You'll be fine." But they were not fine. The money from the sale never came to them. Daniel said it went into a trust. Patricia said the lawyer had it. Stephen did not return their calls at all. And within 2 months, Margaret and Robert were living in this apartment, surviving on Social Security and the kindness of a landlord who pitied them enough to let them rent month to month. The town knew. Small towns always know. Margaret could see it in the eyes of women at the grocery store, the way they looked away quickly, whispered to each other by the produce. She stopped going to church because the pity was worse than the isolation. Robert stopped going to the diner where he had eaten breakfast every Saturday for 30 years because the other men did not know what to say to him. Their children did not visit, did not call. Patricia sent a text on Margaret's birthday. "Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you're well." No call, no card, just 10 words and an emoji. Stephen's number was disconnected. And Daniel sent a Christmas card with a photo of his family in front of a new house. A big house, with a 3-car garage and a manicured lawn. Margaret had cried for 2 days straight when she saw that card. Now she sat at this table, holding an eviction notice because they were 3 months behind on rent, and she did not know what to do. Robert finally turned around. His face was grey, lined with exhaustion and defeat. "We could call Daniel," he said quietly. "Ask for help." Margaret looked at him. Her hands stopped trembling. Her jaw tightened. "No," she said. "We will not beg." Robert nodded. He did not argue, because deep down he knew she was right. Their children had made their choice, and begging would only give them the satisfaction of saying no. That night, Margaret could not sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to Robert's breathing, heavy and troubled. She thought about the house they had lost, the garden she had planted every spring, the porch swing Robert had built with his own hands, the kitchen where she had baked thousands of cookies and cakes and loaves of bread. All of it gone, stolen by the people she had given life to. She closed her eyes and prayed, not for money, not for revenge, just for a way forward, just for something that made sense. The next morning, the mail came early. Robert brought it in, mostly junk and bills they could not pay. But beneath the stack of credit card offers and past-due notices was a thick envelope with a return address from Oregon. Crestview and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Pinehurst, Oregon. Margaret opened it carefully. Inside was a letter typed on heavy paper, the kind lawyers use when something is official. Dear Mrs. Margaret Harrison and Mr. Robert Harrison, we regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Marcus Eugene Walker, your maternal uncle. Mr. Walker passed away on September 19, 2025, at the age of 93. As per his last will and testament, you have been named as sole beneficiaries of his estate, including real property located in Clatsop County, Oregon. Margaret's hands shook. Uncle Marcus. She barely remembered him. A quiet man who had come to their wedding 47 years ago, brought them a set of silver candlesticks, and then disappeared back into whatever life he lived. She had not seen him since, had not even known he was still alive. Robert leaned over her shoulder, reading. The letter continued. The property consists of approximately 80 acres of forested land and one residential structure, a cabin. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss transfer of title and estate settlement. There are no outstanding debts or liens on the property. It is yours free and clear. Robert sat down hard. 80 acres, he whispered. Margaret kept reading. There was a second page, a note handwritten on the bottom. Mr. Walker left specific instructions that you be notified immediately and that you be encouraged to visit the property in person before making any decisions about its future. He believed it held significance you would understand upon arrival. Margaret looked at Robert. He looked back at her. For the first time in 8 months, something other than despair flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or just curiosity. But it was something. Within an hour, Margaret had called the number on the letterhead. A woman answered, professional but kind. Yes, Mrs. Harrison, we have been expecting your call. Her name was Linda, a paralegal. She explained that Uncle Marcus had updated his will 6 months before his death, had specified that Margaret and Robert were to inherit everything. The property was remote, she warned. No utilities, no road access beyond an old logging trail. The cabin itself was old but structurally sound. Mr. Walker lived there alone for over 40 years. Why us? Margaret asked. Why leave it to us? Linda paused. He said in his notes that you were the only family who ever treated him with kindness. He said you deserved something good. Margaret's throat tightened. She thanked Linda and hung up. She turned to Robert. We have to go see it, she said. Even if it's nothing, even if it's just a shack in the woods. We have to see it. Robert nodded. But Margaret, we do not have money for a trip like that. Oregon is 2,000 miles away. She stood up, walked to the bedroom, and opened the drawer where she kept her mother's jewelry. A few pieces, nothing extravagant but enough. We will sell these, she said. We will rent a car, and we will go. Robert started to protest, but she held up her hand. Robert, we have nothing left to lose. Our children took everything. Maybe this uncle we barely knew is giving us a chance. Maybe it is nothing, but maybe it is not. And I would rather die trying than sit here waiting for them to throw us out on the street. He looked at her for a long time. Then he stood up and took her hand. Okay, he said. we go." 3 days later, they told no one where they were going. Margaret packed a small suitcase. Robert printed maps because they did not trust GPS in the mountains. They rented the cheapest car they could find, a beaten-up sedan that rattled when it went over 50 miles per hour, and they drove west. The first day took them through plains and farmland, endless stretches of highway that blurred together. They stopped at cheap motels and ate at truck stops. Margaret watched the miles roll by and felt something loosening in her chest. The further they got from that apartment, from that town, from the children who had abandoned them, the lighter she felt. Robert drove in silence mostly, but once, somewhere in Wyoming, he reached over and took her hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For not giving up on me." She squeezed his hand and said nothing because there was nothing to say. They had each other. That was enough. On the third day, they crossed into Oregon. The landscape changed. Mountains rose up, thick with pine and fir. The air smelled different, cleaner. The road wound through valleys and along rivers so clear you could see the stones on the bottom. Margaret rolled down her window and breathed deep. They reached Pinehurst just before sunset. A tiny logging town, maybe 300 people, one main street with a gas station, a diner, a post office, and not much else. They stopped at the diner for coffee and directions. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a name tag that said Jolene, poured their coffee and asked where they were headed. "The Walker property," Robert said, "up past mile marker 47. Jolene's eyebrows went up. "You buying it?" "No," Margaret said. "We inherited it." Jolene set the coffee pot down and leaned against the counter. "You are Marcus's family." "You knew him?" Margaret asked. Everyone knew Marcus. He came into town maybe twice a year for supplies, kept to himself. Nice enough, but private. Real private. She paused. "You know he lived up there alone for 40 years. No phone, no electricity, just him and the woods." Robert frowned. "How did he survive?" Jolene shrugged. "He had money, paid cash for everything, drove an old truck that barely ran. But he always had cash. People wondered where it came from, but Marcus was not the type you asked questions." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. Did he have family, friends? Jolene shook her head. "Not that I ever saw. He was a ghost. Nice ghost, but a ghost." She refilled their cups. "You planning to stay up there?" "Just visiting," Robert said. "Seeing what we inherited." Jolene smiled. "Well, good luck. It is beautiful country, but it is isolated, real isolated. You got a 4-wheel drive." Robert shook his head. Jolene winced. "You are going to need one. That logging road is rough, real rough." They thanked her, paid, and left. Outside, the sun was dipping below the mountains, painting the sky orange and pink. Margaret looked at Robert. "We came this far," she said. He nodded. "We finish it." They followed the directions Linda had sent. Mile marker 47 was 15 miles outside town. The paved road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to something that barely qualified as a road at all. Ruts and rocks and fallen branches. The rental car groaned and scraped. Robert drove slowly, knuckles white on the wheel. After 3 miles of bone-rattling climbing, they saw it, a clearing in the trees, and in that clearing, a cabin. It was small, maybe 800 square feet, built from riverstone and rough-cut timber. The roof was metal, rusted in places but intact. The windows were small and high. The door was heavy wood, reinforced with iron straps. Robert parked, and they sat in the car for a moment, just staring. "It is real," Margaret whispered. They got out. The air was cold and sharp. The forest around them was silent except for the wind in the trees and the distant call of a bird. Margaret walked slowly toward the cabin. The door had a modern lock, heavy-duty, out of place on such an old structure. Robert pulled the keys Linda had mailed them from his pocket. There were 3 keys on the ring. One fit the lock perfectly. The door swung open with a creak. Inside was dark. Robert found a switch by the door and flipped it. Nothing. No power, he said. Margaret pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. The cabin was one large room with a stone fireplace at one end, a small kitchen area with a hand pump sink and a sleeping loft above. The furniture was simple: a wooden table, 2 chairs, a cot with a wool blanket, shelves lined with books. Everything was dusty but organized, neat, intentional. Robert walked to the fireplace. Above it hung a black and white photograph in a simple frame. A man in his 50s, lean and weathered, standing beside a truck. He looked directly at the camera with eyes that were calm and knowing. "That is him," Margaret said softly. "That is Uncle Marcus." They explored slowly. The books on the shelves were eclectic: novels, history, philosophy, financial journals. Margaret pulled one down and a piece of paper fell out. She picked it up. It was a newspaper clipping from 2008. Headline read, "Market crashes, investors lose billions." In the margin, someone had written in pencil, "Got out in time." Robert was checking the walls, tapping them. "Solid construction," he said. "This place was built to last." Margaret walked to the kitchen area. Beneath the sink was a wooden crate. She opened it. Inside were more clippings, more notes, and a leather journal. She opened the journal carefully. The first page read, "Property log, Marcus Walker, began May 1978. Robert came over. "What is it?" She flipped through the pages. Lists, detailed lists. Acquisitions, investments, conversions, words like gold, bearer bonds, gemstones, art, and numbers, lots of numbers. Robert leaned closer. "Margaret, these numbers, if this is real." He trailed off. She kept flipping. Near the end of the journal, a page simply read, "Vault complete, June 2012. Access code, wedding date, the ones who cared." Margaret's heart stopped. Wedding date. The ones who cared. She looked at Robert. "Our wedding date." He stared at her. Why would he use our wedding date? "Because he was there," she whispered. He remembered. Robert walked to the center of the room. He stomped his foot on the stone floor. The sound was solid, dull. He moved 2 feet to the left and stomped again. This time the sound was different, hollow. Margaret knelt beside him. They both ran their hands over the stones. And then Robert found it. A seam, almost invisible, running in a rectangle about 4 feet by 3 feet. Margaret pulled back the old rug that covered that section of floor. Beneath it, set flush into the stone, was a metal hatch with a combination lock. They both sat back on their heels, breathing hard. Robert looked at Margaret. "What was our wedding date?" "June 14th, 1978. He reached for the lock. His hands shook as he turned the dial. 6/14/78. The lock clicked. The mechanism released. Margaret gasped. Robert gripped the handle and pulled. The hatch lifted with a hiss of released air, like the cabin had been holding its breath for years. Beneath the hatch was darkness. Robert shined his phone light down. Stone steps led down into a chamber below. Cool air drifted up, dry and still. Margaret gripped his arm. "Robert, what is down there?" He looked at her, his face pale in the dim light. Only one way to find out. They descended together, 1 step at a time. The staircase was narrow, carved from stone, leading down about 12 feet. At the bottom, Robert's phone light swept across the space, and they both froze. The vault was the size of a small bedroom, constructed entirely from stone and concrete. The walls were lined with metal shelves, and on those shelves were rows of wooden boxes, plastic containers, and locked cases. Everything labeled, dated, catalogued with the precision of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Robert stepped forward. His light landed on the first shelf. Wooden boxes stamped with official seals. He opened one. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were gold bars, Small ones, 1 ounce each, but dozens of them. He opened another box. More gold. Margaret moved to the next shelf. Locked cases, clear plastic. She could see through them. Coins. Rare coins in individual holders. She recognized some. Silver dollars, gold eagles, ancient Roman coins. Her hand flew to her mouth. Robert's light found another section, stacks of documents in waterproof sleeves. He pulled one out. Bearer bonds, $100,000 denominations. He pulled out another. Stock certificates from companies that no longer existed, but vintage, collectible, valuable. They moved through the vault in stunned silence. There were gemstones in small velvet cases, diamonds, rubies, sapphires. There were paintings in climate-controlled tubes. There were stacks of cash, bills from different decades, all in pristine condition, and everywhere meticulous labels. Acquired 1985, value confirmed 2010, stored 2015. At the back of the vault was a desk. On the desk sat a leather ledger, much larger than the one upstairs. Robert opened it with trembling hands. The pages were filled with columns. Item, acquisition date, acquisition price, estimated current value. He flipped to the last page. At the bottom, in Marcus's careful handwriting, one final entry. Total estate value as of September 2025, $285,412,000. Robert's knees gave out. He sat down hard on the stone floor. Margaret stood over him, tears streaming down her face. $285 million, she whispered. Robert looked up at her. We are sitting on $285 million. They sat in that vault for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Neither could speak, neither could process what they were seeing. This was not a cabin in the woods. This was a fortress. A treasure vault built by a man who had quietly, methodically, over the course of 40 years, converted his wealth into tangible, hidden assets, and then left it all to them. Finally, Margaret found her voice. "Why?" she asked. "Why us? We barely knew him." Robert shook his head. He did not know either. But then he saw something else on the desk, a small wooden box. He opened it. Inside was a USB drive and a note. The note read, "Play this. You will understand." They climbed back up the stairs, their minds reeling. Robert found his laptop in the car. They sat at the table in the cabin, and he plugged in the drive. One file, a video. He clicked play. The screen filled with the image of Uncle Marcus, older than the photo on the wall, but unmistakably him. He sat in this very cabin, in this very chair, the camera propped on the table. His voice was rough but clear. "Margaret, Robert, if you are watching this, I am gone, and you have found what I left for you. I imagine you are confused, maybe scared. Maybe you think this is a trick. It is not. Everything in that vault is real, and it is yours." He paused, cleared his throat. "I know we were not close. I was not close to anyone. That was my choice. I spent my life making money, and I was good at it. Very good. But I learned early that people change when they know you have money. They want things. They expect things. So I disappeared. I took my fortune, converted it to things that could not be traced or taxed or stolen, and I hid it here." He leaned closer to the camera. "But I watched you. Over the years I kept track of my family. Most of them I wanted nothing to do with. But you two, you were different. You came to my sister's funeral when no one else did. You sent me a Christmas card every year, even though I never sent one back. You treated me like I mattered even when I gave you no reason to." His eyes grew hard. "And I saw what your children did to you. I saw them take your home, abandon you. I know what it is like to be betrayed by people who are supposed to love you, and I will not let them take this from you too." He pointed at the camera. "That vault is protected. I have documentation, legal documentation, that proves every item was acquired legally. I have paid every tax I owed. There is nothing anyone can do to take it from you. But you must be smart. People will come for it. Your children will come for it. You must protect it. Protect yourselves." He sat back. Use this money to live, to be free, to help others if you want. I do not care. It is yours. But do not let them take it. Do not let them win. The video ended. The screen went black. Margaret and Robert sat in silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, and then Margaret started to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had been pushed past the edge of exhaustion into something like hysteria. Robert looked at her, alarmed. Then he started laughing too. They laughed until they cried, until their sides hurt, until the absurdity of it all, the cosmic joke of it, finally settled into something like acceptance. They had lost everything, been betrayed by their own children, reduced to nothing, and now, in the middle of nowhere, they were sitting on $285 million. When the laughter finally stopped, Margaret wiped her eyes. "We cannot tell anyone," she said. Robert nodded. "Not yet." "What do we do?" "We think," he said. "We plan, and we protect it, just like Marcus said." They spent the night in the cabin. Margaret slept in the loft, Robert on the cot. Neither slept well. Every sound made them jump. Every creak of the trees felt like a threat, because already, even though no one knew, they felt the weight of what they carried. And somewhere, 2,000 miles away, their children slept soundly in homes bought with stolen money, never imagining that the parents they had thrown away were about to become the richest people they would never touch. The first light of dawn crept through the high windows of the cabin, pale and cold. Margaret woke with her back aching from the thin mattress in the loft, but her mind was sharp, alert. Below, she could hear Robert moving around, the soft scrape of a chair, the sound of him trying to make coffee with no electricity and just a hand pump for water. She climbed down the ladder and found him sitting at the table, the leather ledger open in front of him, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up when she approached. "I have been going through this since 4 a.m, he said quietly. His voice was hoarse. "Margaret, this is not just gold bars and cash. This is—" He stopped, shook his head. "This is a lifetime of planning." She sat across from him. "Show me." Robert turned the ledger around. Each page was divided into categories: precious metals, gemstones, currency, bonds and securities, art and collectibles, and under each category, dozens of entries. Gold acquired June 1982, 10 ounces, spot price $426 per ounce, current value approximately $19,000, 10 ounces. And there were hundreds of entries like that. Margaret ran her finger down the page. "He bought steadily," she said, "over decades." Robert nodded. "Look at the dates. He started in the late 1970s, bought through the 80s and 90s. But look here." He pointed to a section. 2007 and 2008. Huge acquisitions. He converted everything. Stocks, bonds, real estate holdings, all of it liquidated and converted to physical assets right before the market crashed. Margaret felt a chill. He knew. "He knew," Robert confirmed, "or he guessed right. Either way, he got out before everyone else lost everything, and he brought it all here." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Margaret stood. "We need to see everything," she said. "All of it. We need to know exactly what we have." They spent the next 3 hours in the vault. Robert found a battery-powered lantern in a cabinet upstairs, and they brought it down. The light was harsh and bright, revealing every detail. They started at the left wall and worked their way around systematically. Margaret took notes in a small spiral notebook she found in her purse. Robert handled the items carefully, reverently. The gold was stored in wooden boxes, each containing 10 to 20 bars. Some were 1-ounce bars, others were larger, 5 ounces, 10 ounces. Robert counted them. 317 bars total. He did the math in his head. At current prices, close to $7 million just in gold. The coins were stored in hard plastic cases, individually graded and certified. Margaret recognized some from when she used to collect state quarters with her grandchildren before, before everything. These were not state quarters. These were Morgan silver dollars, St. Gordon's double eagles, ancient Greek drachmas, Roman aurii. Each case had a small label with the coin's grade and estimated value. She added them up. Another $4 million conservatively. The gemstones made her gasp. Small velvet boxes, each containing a single stone or a small collection. Diamonds, some as large as her thumbnail. Rubies the color of blood. Sapphires that seemed to hold the ocean inside them. Emeralds so green they looked alive. Each box had a certificate of authenticity and an appraisal document. Robert whistled low when he read the numbers. $12 million. Just in gemstones. Then there were the bonds. Stacks and stacks of bearer bonds, the kind that were no longer issued but still valid. $100,000 denominations, $500,000 denominations, some from the 1980s, some older. Robert counted them 3 times because he could not believe the number. $84 million in bonds. The currency was stored in vacuum-sealed bags, organized by decade and condition. Crisp bills from the 1920s, mint-condition hundreds from the 1950s, uncirculated notes from the 1970s. Some were rare, some were just old, but all of it was valuable to collectors. Another $3 million, maybe more. And then there was the art. Margaret carefully unrolled the first tube. Inside was a painting. Small, maybe 12 inches by 16 inches, protected in archival plastic. She did not recognize the artist's signature, but the style looked familiar. Impressionist, maybe. Robert found a folder near the desk labeled provenance and certificates. Inside were documents for each piece. The painting Margaret held was listed as a minor work by a known French impressionist. Estimated value, $2 million. There were 6 more tubes. Each contained something valuable. A sketch by a Renaissance master, a watercolor by an American landscape painter, a small oil painting from the Dutch Golden Age. Robert's hands shook as he read the values. $23 million in art alone. They sat on the stone floor of the vault, surrounded by unimaginable wealth, and just breathed. Margaret looked around. "How did he do this?" she whispered. "How did one man accumulate all of this and hide it here for 40 years? Robert picked up the large ledger again. He flipped to the front. There was a page he had not noticed before, tucked into a pocket inside the cover. A letter, handwritten, addressed to them. He read it aloud. "Dear Margaret and Robert, if you have found this letter, then you have found the vault. And if you have found the vault, then you are asking yourself why. Let me tell you my story. I was born in 1932, the son of a poor coal miner in Kentucky. My father died when I was 12. My mother raised 5 children alone during the Depression. I learned early that poverty is not noble. It is brutal. It crushes dreams. It kills hope. I swore I would never be poor again. I joined the army at 18, served in Korea, came home and used the GI Bill to go to college, studied finance, got a job on Wall Street in 1956. I was good at it, very good. I understood numbers, patterns. I could see what others could not. By the time I was 30, I was a millionaire. By 40, I had 10 million. By 50, I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But I also learned that money changes people. I watched colleagues destroy friendships over deals. I watched families tear each other apart over inheritances. I watched people I loved become people I did not recognize. So I made a choice. I disappeared. I took my fortune, converted it to things that could not be easily stolen or traced, and I came here. I built this cabin. I built this vault. And I lived quietly, peacefully, alone. Over the years, I kept track of my family from a distance. I saw who married whom, who had children, who succeeded, who failed. And I saw you too. You were different. You were kind. You lived simply. You loved each other. You treated people with dignity even when you had little yourselves. And when your children betrayed you, when they stole your home and left you with nothing, I knew what I had to do. This fortune is yours. Not because you are blood, though you are, but because you deserve it. You earned it by being good people in a world that punishes goodness. Use it wisely, protect it fiercely, and do not let those who hurt you take anything more from you. You owe them nothing. Signed, Marcus Eugene Walker. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She reached out and took Robert's hand. He was crying too. They sat there, two people in their late 60s, beaten down by life and family, holding hands in a stone vault filled with more money than most people would ever see. And for the first time in months, they felt something other than pain. They felt gratitude. But the moment did not last. Robert's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowned. It was a text from a number he did not recognize. Just got a call from someone asking about you. Said you inherited property in Oregon. Wanted to know if you needed help managing it. Thought you should know. The text was from Frank, the man who ran the hardware store back home, one of the few people who had stayed kind to them after the children took the house. Robert showed Margaret the text. Her face went pale. How would anyone know we are here? They looked at each other. Then Robert stood quickly. Come on, we need to check outside. They climbed the stairs and went out the front door. The morning was bright now, the sun cutting through the trees. Robert walked around the perimeter of the cabin slowly, his eyes scanning the ground, the trees, the brush. Margaret followed. And then she saw it. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt, just beyond where their rental car was parked. Tracks that were not theirs. Robert, she said, pointing. He knelt beside the tracks. These are new, within the last day. He looked up at the tree line. Someone was here. They walked further, following the tracks. About 50 yards from the cabin, tucked into the low branches of a pine tree, Robert found it. A small black camera, no bigger than a matchbox, pointed directly at the cabin. It had a small blinking red light. It was on. It was recording. Margaret's breath caught. Robert carefully pulled it down. It was attached to the tree with a strap. Commercial equipment, basic but functional. He turned it over in his hands. This was not here when we arrived yesterday, he said. Someone put this up after we got here. Who? Margaret asked. Who even knows we are here? Robert thought. Linda, the paralegal. She knew. The lawyer. But why would they? He stopped. Unless someone asked them. Margaret's stomach dropped. The children. They went back inside. Robert immediately called Linda's office. She answered on the second ring. Hello, Mr. Harrison. Is everything all right? Linda, Robert said, his voice tight. Has anyone contacted you asking about us? About this property? There was a pause. Yes, actually. Yesterday afternoon, a man called. Said he was your son. Daniel, I think. He wanted to know the details of the inheritance. I told him I could not share that information without your permission. What else did he ask? He wanted the address of the property. I told him I could not give that out either. He was insistent, almost aggressive. I had to hang up on him. Robert closed his eyes. Did you tell him anything? No, Linda said firmly. I told him to contact you directly. I gave him nothing. Thank you, Robert said. But Linda, I need you to do something. I need you to make sure no one, and I mean no one, gets any information about this property or what is on it. Not my children. Not anyone claiming to be family. No one. Can you do that? Of course, she said. Mr. Harrison, is something wrong? Just precautions, Robert said. I will explain later. He hung up. Margaret was pacing. Daniel knows, she said. He knows we inherited something. And if he knows, Patricia and Stephen know. And if they know. She trailed off. Robert finished the thought. They will come. They will try to take it. Margaret stopped pacing. Her face hardened. Over my dead body. Robert looked at his wife. In that moment, she was not a scared old woman. She was a fighter, and he loved her for it. We need to secure this place, he said. And we need to document everything. Photos, videos, everything in that vault. If this goes to court, we need proof." They spent the rest of the day working. Robert took photos of every single item in the vault. Margaret made detailed notes. They found a fireproof safe in the back corner of the vault, hidden behind a stack of boxes. Inside were more documents, deeds, titles, certificates of authenticity, appraisals, everything organized, labeled, legal. Marcus had thought of everything. There was also another USB drive. Robert plugged it into his laptop. More videos, dozens of them. Each one was Marcus explaining a different part of the collection, where he acquired certain pieces, why he chose certain investments, how he authenticated everything. It was like a masterclass in wealth preservation taught by a ghost. In one video, Marcus looked directly at the camera. If you are watching this, you are probably wondering if this is legal. It is. Every item in this vault was purchased legally. I paid taxes on the income I earned. I followed every law. The only thing I did was remove my wealth from the system. I did not trust banks. I did not trust the government. I trusted stone and metal and things I could hold in my hands. No one can take this from you unless you let them. Margaret and Robert watched every video. By the time they finished, it was dark outside. They were exhausted, but they were also prepared. They knew what they had. They knew it was legal, and they knew they had to protect it. That night, they tried to sleep, but every sound jerked them awake. Around midnight, Margaret heard something outside. She nudged Robert. He was already awake. They both lay still, listening. Footsteps, soft, careful, circling the cabin. Robert slipped out of bed and grabbed the heavy flashlight from the table. He moved to the window and peeked out. In the moonlight, he saw a figure, a man dressed in dark clothing, moving along the tree line. The man stopped, looked at the cabin, then pulled out a phone and took a photo. Robert's blood ran cold. He moved to the door, unlocked it quietly, and stepped outside. The man heard the door and turned. For a moment, they stared at each other across the clearing. Then the man ran. Robert started to follow but stopped. He was 70 years old. He was not chasing anyone through the woods at night. He went back inside. Margaret was standing by the table, clutching a kitchen knife. "What was it?" she asked. "Someone scouting the property," Robert said. "Taking photos." Margaret's grip tightened on the knife. "They are not even trying to hide it anymore." Robert locked the door and pushed the heavy table against it. "We leave in the morning," he said. "We go back to town. We find a lawyer, a real lawyer, someone who specializes in this kind of thing. And we make this ironclad legal before they make their move." Margaret nodded. "But we are not giving up the cabin." "No," Robert said. "We are not giving up anything. What happens next will turn this inheritance into a battlefield, expose the darkest sides of family greed, and prove that sometimes the people you trust least are the ones who want the most. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you are enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more." They left the cabin at dawn, locking everything behind them. The drive back down the mountain felt longer, every bump and rut a reminder of how isolated they were, how vulnerable. When they reached Pinehurst, they stopped at the diner again. Jolene was working, pouring coffee for a table of loggers. She saw them come in and waved them over. "You are back," she said. "How was the cabin?" "It is." "Something," Margaret said carefully. "Jolene, do you know any lawyers around here? Good ones." Jolene thought for a moment. "There is a firm in Astoria, about an hour west, Crestview and Associates. They handle estates, property disputes, that kind of thing." "We know them," Robert said. "They are the ones who contacted us about the inheritance. But we need someone else, someone who does not already know about the property." Jolene's eyebrows went up. "You expecting trouble?" Margaret looked at Robert. He nodded. "Our children," Margaret said quietly. They took our home last year. convinced us to sign it over, then sold it out from under us. Now they know we inherited this property, and we think they are going to try to take it too." Jolene's face darkened. "That is low. Real low." "It is," Margaret agreed. "So we need someone who can protect us. Someone tough." Jolene poured them coffee and sat down at their booth. "Okay," she said. "I am going to tell you something. There is a lawyer in Portland. Name is James Madsen. He is expensive. Like, really expensive. But he specializes in contested estates and family disputes. He does not lose, like ever. My cousin used him when her ex-husband tried to claim her inheritance from her parents. James tore him apart in court." Robert pulled out his phone. "Do you have his number?" Jolene wrote it on a napkin. "But fair warning," she said. "He does not take every case. He only works with people he believes are in the right. You will have to convince him you are worth his time." "We will convince him," Margaret said. They finished their coffee, thanked Jolene, and called the number. A receptionist answered, professional and brisk. "Madsen Law Group. How may I direct your call?" "We need to speak with James Madsen," Robert said. "It is urgent. It is regarding a contested estate inheritance." "Mr. Madsen is in court today," the receptionist said. "I can take a message," Robert explained briefly. Within 10 minutes his phone rang back. A deep voice, confident and direct. "This is James Madsen. I got your message. Tell me what is going on." Robert told him everything. The inheritance, the children stealing their home, the property in Oregon, the vault. He did not mention the dollar amount, just that it was significant and that people were already scouting the property. James listened without interrupting. When Robert finished, there was a long pause. Finally, James spoke. "You are telling me your children defrauded you out of your home, and now they are attempting to claim an inheritance that is legally yours." "Yes," Robert said. "And you have documentation proving the inheritance is legitimate?" "Yes, everything. Deeds, certificates, video recordings from the deceased explaining his intentions." Another pause. "Where are you right now?" "Pinehurst," Robert said. "Stay there. I will be there tomorrow morning. Do not talk to anyone about this. Do not post anything on social media. Do not tell your children where you are. Do not trust anyone except each other. Understand?" "Yes," Robert said. "Good. See you tomorrow." The line went dead. Margaret looked at Robert. "He is coming." "He is coming," Robert confirmed, and he sounded like he meant business. They spent the night in a small motel in Pinehurst. Margaret barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face, Patricia's cold stare, Stephen's indifference. She thought about the home they had stolen, the life they had destroyed, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Anger, not sadness, not hurt, pure, burning anger. James Madsen arrived at 9 in the morning. He pulled up in a black SUV, stepped out, and immediately commanded the space. He was in his early 50s, tall, with silver hair and sharp eyes. He wore a suit that probably cost more than their rental car. He shook their hands firmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, James Madsen, let us talk." They sat in the motel's small breakfast room. James pulled out a leather portfolio and a voice recorder. "I'm going to record this conversation for my notes. Is that acceptable?" "Yes," Margaret said. James pressed record. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." They did. They told him about their marriage, their children, the slow drift apart, the lawyer Daniel brought, the papers they signed, the house being sold, the eviction, the poverty, the shame. And then the letter from Oregon, the cabin, the vault, the $285 million. James did not blink at the number. He just kept taking notes. When they finished, he sat back. "Okay," he said. "First, the good news. The inheritance is yours. Your uncle left clear documentation. You are the named beneficiaries. There is no legal challenge your children can make to the will itself." Robert felt relief flood through him. "And the bad news?" James leaned forward. The bad news is that your children will try anyway. They will claim undue influence. They will claim you are not mentally competent to manage such wealth. They will drag you through court, through the media, through hell to try to get a piece of this. And if they cannot get it legally, they will try other methods." "What other methods?" Margaret asked. "Intimidation, harassment, possibly even attempting to have you declared incompetent and placed under guardianship. I have seen it before. Families can be vicious when money is involved." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Let them try." James smiled slightly. "I like you, Mrs. Harrison. Here is what we are going to do. We are going to lock this down legally. I am going to file paperwork establishing an irrevocable trust with you two as trustees. We are going to get the property appraised and documented. We are going to get restraining orders if necessary. And we are going to make it very, very clear that anyone who attempts to interfere with your legal inheritance will be met with the full force of the law." Robert nodded. "How much is this going to cost?" James named a retainer fee that made them both wince. But then he said, "However, I am willing to work on contingency for a portion of the estate once it is secured, if you are comfortable with that." They looked at each other. "Yes," Margaret said. "We are comfortable with that." "Good," James said. "Now I need to see this vault. I need to photograph everything, document everything, and secure it. When can we go?" "Now," Robert said. They drove back to the cabin in convoy, James following in his SUV. When they arrived, he walked the property, taking notes. He examined the locks, the structure, the tire tracks, the place where Robert found the camera. He did not say much, just observed. Then they went inside. Robert opened the hatch. James descended into the vault, and for the first time since they met him, his professional composure cracked. He stood in the center of the vault, turning slowly, taking it all in. Then he looked at Robert. This is extraordinary." "It is real," Robert said. James pulled out a professional camera and began photographing everything. He spent 3 hours documenting every item, every label, every certificate. When he was done, he climbed back upstairs and sat at the table. "Okay," he said, "here is what I know. This collection is worth at least $285 million, possibly more depending on current market values. It is legal, it is documented, and it is now the most secure inheritance I have ever handled." He looked at them seriously. "But you need to understand something. The moment your children find out the true value of this, they will come after you with everything they have. Are you prepared for that?" Margaret looked at Robert. He looked back at her. Then she turned to James. "We have already lost everything once," she said. "We are not losing this, so yes, we are prepared." James nodded. "Then let us go to war." The first sign came 3 days later. Margaret and Robert had returned to the motel in Pinehurst while James worked on the legal paperwork. They were sitting in their room, eating takeout from the diner, when Robert's phone rang. Daniel. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then answered on speaker. "Dad." Daniel's voice was friendly, warm, the way it used to be when he was a boy asking for something. "Hey, I have been trying to reach you. Where are you guys?" Robert kept his voice neutral. "We are taking care of some business. What do you need, Daniel?" "Well, I heard you inherited some property. In Oregon, right? That is great. Really great. I was thinking maybe Patricia, Stephen, and I could come out and help you guys manage it. You know, make sure you are not getting taken advantage of. Old property like that, there are a lot of scammers out there." Margaret's hand clenched into a fist. Robert saw it and put his hand over hers. "We are fine, Daniel. We have legal help." There was a pause. "Legal help? Dad, that costs money. Money you do not have. Look, I know things have been tense between us, but we are still family. Let us help." The audacity of it made Margaret's vision blur red. She grabbed the phone. "Daniel, this is your mother. You stole our home. You left us with nothing. And now you want to help." Her voice cracked with fury. "You do not get to help. You do not get to be family. Not anymore. Mom." Daniel's tone shifted, became harder. You are not thinking clearly. You are old. You are stressed. This inheritance, whatever it is going to be complicated. You need us. We need nothing from you, Margaret said, and hung up. The phone rang again immediately. She declined the call. It rang again. She turned it off. Robert's phone started ringing. Patricia. He turned his off too. For a moment, they just sat there, breathing hard. Then Margaret started laughing. Not a happy laugh. A bitter one. They do not even pretend anymore, she said. They just want the money. Robert nodded. James said this would happen, that they would try to sound helpful first, caring. Margaret's jaw set. What comes next? Robert looked at her. He said they would escalate. They did. The next morning, a car pulled up outside the motel. A black sedan, expensive. Out stepped all three of their children, Daniel in a suit, Patricia in designer sunglasses, Stephen looking uncomfortable but present. They walked straight to the motel office. Margaret saw them from the window, and her heart started pounding. They are here, she whispered. Robert was already on the phone with James. They are at the motel. All three of them. What do we do? Do not engage, James said sharply. Do not speak to them. Do not open the door. I am 15 minutes away. Just wait. Margaret and Robert locked their door and stood away from the window. They could hear voices outside. Daniel talking to the motel manager. The manager saying he could not give out room numbers. Daniel's voice rising. Patricia's sharp tone. Then footsteps. Someone trying door handles. Robert moved in front of Margaret. The footsteps stopped at their door. A knock. Dad. Mum. It is Daniel. Open up. We need to talk. Silence. Another knock, harder. Mom, I know you are in there. We drove all the way out here. The least you can do is talk to us. Margaret's hands shook. Robert put his finger to his lips. They stayed silent. After a long moment, they heard Daniel's voice again, muffled, talking to someone else. This is ridiculous. They are acting like children. Then Patricia's voice. Maybe they are not even here. Maybe they already left. Footsteps retreating. Margaret let out a breath. But they did not leave the property. Through the window, she saw them get back in the car and park it across the street. Watching. Waiting. James arrived 12 minutes later. He parked next to the children's car, got out, and walked straight to the driver's window. Robert and Margaret watched from behind the curtain. They could not hear what was said, but they saw Daniel's face go red, saw Patricia lean over to argue, saw James hand something through the window. Then he walked away, came to their door and knocked. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, it is James. They let him in. He was calm, but there was a hardness in his eyes. I just served them with a cease and desist order. They are not to contact you, approach you, or make any claims on the property. If they violate it, they can be arrested. What did they say? Margaret asked. Daniel threatened to sue me, James said with a slight smile. I told him to go ahead. It would make my job easier. Are they leaving? Robert asked. James glanced out the window. Not yet, but they will. I also informed them that any attempt to interfere with your inheritance would be met with a countersuit for the theft of your previous home. That got their attention. Margaret felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you. James sat down. But I need to be honest with you. This is just the beginning. They are going to go back, regroup, and come at you harder. They will hire lawyers. They will file motions. Daniel mentioned something about having you declared incompetent. We need to get ahead of that. How? Robert asked. Medical evaluations, James said. I have already scheduled appointments for both of you with a neurologist and a psychiatrist in Portland. We are going to get documentation that you are both mentally sound, capable of managing your affairs, and fully competent. It will take away their main angle of attack. When? Margaret asked. Tomorrow, James said. I know it is fast, but we do not have time to wait. They nodded. Outside, the black sedan finally pulled away. But Margaret knew they would be back. People like Daniel did not give up when $285 million was at stake. The medical evaluations took 2 days. A neurologist tested their memory, cognitive function, reasoning. A psychiatrist evaluated their mental health, their decision-making capacity, their understanding of their situation. Both doctors concluded the same thing. Margaret and Robert Harrison were fully competent, mentally sound, and capable of managing complex financial affairs. James had the reports filed with the court immediately. But he also did something else. He started investigating Daniel, Patricia, and Stephen. And what he found made even him angry. He came to the motel on a Thursday evening with a thick folder. "We need to talk," he said. His face was grim. They sat at the small table. James opened the folder. "I hired a private investigator to look into your children's finances. What we found is troubling." He pulled out documents. Daniel is $643,000 in debt. Credit cards, business loans, a second mortgage on his house. His business is failing. He has been using credit to stay afloat. Patricia is in similar shape. $412,000 in debt. Her real estate license is under review for ethics violations. Apparently, she has been caught forging signatures on contracts. And Stephen. James shook his head. Stephen declared bankruptcy 2 years ago. He owes the IRS over $200,000 in back taxes. Margaret felt sick. They are all broke. Worse than broke, James said. They are desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. He pulled out more papers. I also found this. 3 months ago, before your Uncle Marcus even died, Daniel hired a private investigator to look into your family's assets and potential inheritances. He knew something was coming. He has been planning this. Robert's fist hit the table. He knew. Before Marcus died, he was already planning to take it. James nodded. Which means this was not opportunistic. This was premeditated. And that gives us leverage. How? Margaret asked. Because, James said, this shows a pattern of financial exploitation and fraud. Combined with the forged documents they used to take your house, we have grounds for a criminal complaint, not just a civil suit. Criminal charges. Margaret looked at Robert. Do we do it? James leaned forward. If you file criminal charges, this gets very real very fast. They could face jail time. It will destroy what is left of your relationship permanently. There will be no going back. Margaret thought about the house they had stolen, the shame they had caused, the poverty they had forced on them, the way they had shown up here not with apologies but with demands. She looked at James. File the charges. The explosion was immediate. When the criminal complaint was filed, Daniel hired a high-priced attorney from Seattle. Patricia and Stephen pooled their resources and got another one. Within a week, the case was all over the local news back home. Elderly couple files criminal charges against children for elder abuse and fraud. The town that had whispered about Margaret and Robert being foolish was now whispering about their children being criminals. And then the children made their biggest mistake. They went to the media. Daniel gave an interview to a local television station. His face was sincere, hurt. My parents are not well, he said on camera. They have been manipulated by people who want their inheritance. We are just trying to protect them. This lawyer they hired, he is taking advantage of them. We love our parents. We just want them to be safe. The interview aired on a Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, James had filed a defamation lawsuit. By Wednesday afternoon, he had called a press conference. Margaret and Robert stood next to him outside the courthouse in Portland, cameras flashing. James read a statement. My clients, Margaret and Robert Harrison, are fully competent, mentally sound, and victims of a systematic campaign of financial abuse by their own children. We have medical evaluations confirming their competency. We have documentation proving their children defrauded them out of their home. and we have evidence that this abuse has been ongoing and calculated. This is not a case of concerned children. This is a case of greed, fraud, and betrayal." Reporters shouted questions. James answered some. Margaret and Robert said nothing. They just stood there, dignified, united. And the image of them, two elderly people holding hands while their children tried to destroy them, went viral. The public turned. Hard. Social media exploded. People shared stories of their own family betrayals. Lawyers offered pro bono help. Advocacy groups for elder abuse reached out, and donations started pouring in to cover their legal costs, even though they did not need it. James quietly redirected the donations to an elder abuse prevention fund. But the children did not stop. They filed a motion for emergency guardianship, claiming Margaret and Robert were being unduly influenced and needed protection. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. James prepared like he was going to war. He deposed Daniel, Patricia, and Stephen. He tore apart their finances. He brought in expert witnesses, and he prepared Margaret and Robert to testify. The night before the hearing, Margaret could not sleep. She sat in the motel room, staring at the ceiling. Robert was awake too. "Are we doing the right thing?" she whispered. "Yes," he said, "because if we do not fight, they win, and I am tired of letting them win." The courtroom was packed. The hearing was open to the public, and people came. Advocates, reporters, locals who had heard the story. Margaret and Robert sat at the plaintiff's table with James. Across the aisle sat Daniel, Patricia, and Stephen with their lawyers. Margaret looked at her children. Daniel would not meet her eyes. Patricia stared straight ahead, her face hard. Stephen looked miserable, like he wanted to be anywhere else. The judge entered. The Honourable Catherine Morrison, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. She reviewed the motions, then looked at the children's attorney. "Counsellor, make your case." The attorney stood. "Your Honour, we are seeking emergency guardianship for Mr. and Mrs. Harrison on the grounds that they are not capable of managing a complex estate inheritance and are being unduly influenced by outside parties, specifically their attorney, Mr. Madsen." Judge Morrison looked at James. "Mr. Madsen, you are accused of undue influence. How do you respond?" James stood. "Your Honour, I respond by presenting medical evaluations from 2 independent doctors confirming my client's full competency. I also present financial records showing that my client's children defrauded them out of their home, have significant debts, and stand to benefit financially from gaining control of this inheritance. The only undue influence here is the influence these children have attempted to exert on their parents for financial gain." He handed a stack of documents to the bailiff. The judge read through them slowly. Then she looked at Daniel. "Mr. Harrison, did you convince your parents to sign over their home to you?" Daniel's lawyer whispered to him. Daniel spoke carefully. "We worked with them on estate planning, Your Honour. It was a mutual decision." Judge Morrison held up a document. "This is a deed transfer dated 14 months ago. According to these records, the house was sold 3 weeks after your parents signed it over to you. And the proceeds went." "Where?" Daniel shifted. "Into a family trust." "And who controls that trust?" "I do," Daniel admitted. "And how much money from that trust has gone to your parents?" Silence. "Mr. Harrison," Judge Morrison's voice was cold, "answer the question." "None," Daniel said quietly. The courtroom murmured. Judge Morrison held up her hand for silence. "So you convinced your elderly parents to sign over their home, sold it, kept the money, and left them with nothing?" "It was not like that," Daniel started. "Then what was it like?" the judge snapped. "Because from where I am sitting, it looks like textbook elder financial abuse." Patricia's lawyer stood. "Your Honour, may I?" "Sit down," Judge Morrison said. "I am not done." She turned to James. "Mr. Madsen, your clients wish to testify." "Yes, Your Honour. Call your first witness." James stood. "I call Margaret Harrison." Margaret walked to the stand, her legs shaking but her head high. She was sworn in. James approached gently. "Mrs. Harrison, can you tell the court about the day your children asked you to sign over your home?" Margaret took a breath. Then she told the story. The lawyer Daniel brought. The papers, he said, were just estate planning, the promises that it would protect the family, the shock when the house was sold, the eviction, the shame, the poverty. And as she spoke, her voice grew stronger. She looked directly at Daniel. "You told me it was to protect us," she said. "But you lied. You stole our home. You left us with nothing. And now you want to steal this too." Tears ran down her face, but her voice did not waver. "I am not incompetent," she said. "I am not confused. I know exactly what you did, and I will not let you do it again." The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison's face was unreadable. James looked at the children's lawyers. "Your witness." They had no questions. Robert testified next. He was calmer, more factual. He presented documents, showed timelines, explained how they had been systematically isolated and impoverished by their children. And then he said something that made even the judge's expression soften. "We loved them," he said. "We gave them everything, and they repaid us by taking what little we had left. This inheritance is not about money. It is about having something they cannot take. It is about dignity." When he stepped down, Judge Morrison called for a recess. She returned 20 minutes later. Her decision was swift. Motion for guardianship denied. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into the deed transfer and sale of the Harrison family home. If the evidence supports criminal fraud, I will refer this to the district attorney. She looked at Daniel, Patricia, and Stephen. "You should be ashamed of yourselves." She banged her gavel. Court adjourned. The children left quickly, surrounded by their lawyers. Margaret and Robert stayed seated. James put his hand on Robert's shoulder. "You won," he said. Margaret started crying. Not from sadness, from relief, from vindication, from the overwhelming sense that finally, someone had listened. Robert held her. Around them, people in the courtroom applauded. Strangers, advocates, people who had seen themselves in Margaret and Robert's story. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. James made a brief statement. "Justice was served today. My clients are competent, capable, and victims of a terrible betrayal by the people who should have protected them. We hope this sends a message that elder abuse will not be tolerated." A reporter shouted a question. "What about the inheritance? What is it worth?" James smiled slightly. "That is private. But I can tell you this. My clients plan to use their resources to help others who have suffered similar abuse. They plan to build something good from the pain they endured." Margaret looked at the cameras. She had never spoken publicly before, but something in her wanted to. She stepped forward. James looked surprised, but stepped aside. She spoke clearly. "To anyone out there who has been betrayed by family, who has been told they are too old or too confused or too weak to fight back, I want you to know something. You are not alone, and you are stronger than they think. Do not give up. Fight, because you deserve dignity, you deserve justice, and you deserve to be heard." The cameras flashed. The moment was captured. And the next day, Margaret's words were everywhere. On news sites, on social media, shared by advocacy groups. She became a symbol, not just of victimhood, but of resistance, of strength. But the fight was not over. 2 weeks after the hearing, Daniel was arrested. The district attorney filed charges. Fraud, forgery, elder abuse. Patricia was charged next. Her real estate license was revoked. Stephen was not charged criminally, but he lost his job when his employer saw the news coverage. Margaret and Robert did not celebrate. They just felt tired of fighting, tired of hurting. They returned to Oregon, to the cabin, to the quiet. James had arranged for security, cameras, motion sensors, a guard who checked the property twice a day. The vault was secure. The inheritance was protected. One evening, sitting on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun set through the trees, Robert turned to Margaret. "Do you think we did the right thing?" he asked. "Pressing charges, destroying them." Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "We did not destroy them. They destroyed themselves. We just refused to let them destroy us too." Robert nodded. He took her hand. "What do we do now?" She smiled. "We live. We build something good. We help people, just like we told Marcus we would." And somewhere, in the stone vault beneath their feet, $285 million waited, not as a curse, not as a burden, but as a tool, a means to an end, a way to take pain and turn it into purpose. The children had tried to take everything, but they had failed. And now Margaret and Robert stood at the beginning of something new, something powerful, something that would honor Marcus's legacy and their own survival. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months after the hearing, Margaret and Robert sat in a conference room in downtown Portland with James and a team of financial advisors. The vault had been carefully emptied over the course of 3 weeks, each item catalogued, transported in armored vehicles, and placed in secure facilities. The gold went to a private vault in Switzerland, the gemstones to another in London, the art to climate-controlled storage in New York. The bonds and securities were converted to digital accounts, diversified, protected by layers of legal entities and trusts that James had constructed like a fortress. The total, after professional appraisals and current market valuations, came to $292,700,000, even more than Marcus had estimated. Robert stared at the number on the page in front of him. It still did not feel real. Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand. "It is real," she said quietly, "and we need to decide what to do with it." James had recommended they take time, live modestly, let the attention die down. But Margaret had other ideas. She had been thinking about what she said on the courthouse steps, about helping others, about building something good from pain. She looked at the financial advisors, a team of 3 professionals James had vetted personally. "I want to create a foundation," she said, "for people who have been abused by their families, elderly people who have nowhere to turn." The lead advisor, a woman named Claire, nodded. "That is absolutely possible. We can structure it as a charitable foundation, give you control over how the funds are distributed, and create programs that directly help victims." "What kind of programs?" Robert asked. Margaret had been making lists. "Legal aid," she said, "so people can fight back without going broke. Emergency housing for people who have been displaced. Counseling services. Advocacy. Education about elder abuse and how to prevent it. And," she paused, "loans or grants to help people rebuild their lives after they have been financially destroyed by family." Claire was taking notes. "This is very doable. With your level of funding, you could create something substantial, something that lasts." James leaned forward. "I would also recommend setting aside funds for investigative work, helping to expose and prosecute elder abuse cases, making examples of abusers so others think twice." Margaret nodded. "Yes, all of that." Over the next 3 months, the Marcus and Margaret Harrison Foundation was born. They funded it with $50 million initially, with plans to add more as needed. They hired a small staff. They rented office space in Portland. And they quietly began reaching out to legal aid organizations, elder advocacy groups, and social workers who dealt with financial abuse cases. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks, they had hundreds of applications for help. Elderly people who had been scammed by caregivers, seniors whose children had stolen their savings, victims of guardianship abuse who had lost everything to court-appointed predators. Each story broke Margaret's heart, and each one made her more determined. They helped a 72-year-old woman in Florida whose son had forged her signature and stolen her life savings. The foundation paid for lawyers who got the money back and had the son prosecuted. They helped an 80-year-old man in Ohio whose daughter had convinced him to sign over his house and then evicted him. The foundation bought him a small condo and paid for his living expenses. They helped a couple in their late 60s whose financial advisor had embezzled their retirement. The foundation covered their losses and helped send the advisor to prison. But Margaret and Robert did not do it from a distance. They visited people. They sat in their homes and listened to their stories. They held their hands and told them they were not alone, and in doing so, they healed something in themselves. The pain of betrayal began to transform into purpose. One visit stood out above all others. Margaret and Robert flew to Tennessee to meet a woman named Rose. She was 84 years old and had been living in a storage unit for 3 months after her grandson and his wife had stolen her house through a forged power of attorney. When Margaret and Robert arrived at the storage facility, they found Rose sitting on a folding chair outside Unit 23, reading a library book in the fading afternoon light. She looked up when they approached, her eyes suspicious. "Can I help you?" "Mrs. Rose," Margaret said gently, "my name is Margaret Harrison. This is my husband Robert. We are from the Harrison Foundation. We got your application for help." Rose's face crumpled. She tried to stand, but her legs shook. Margaret rushed forward and caught her arm. "It is okay," Margaret said. "We are here now. You are not alone anymore." They sat with Rose on cheap lawn chairs borrowed from the storage facility manager. She told them her story through tears. Her grandson had always been her favorite. She had helped raise him when his mother, Rose's daughter, had died of cancer. She had paid for his wedding, helped with the down payment on his first house. And when he asked her to sign papers giving him power of attorney so he could help with her bills, she had not hesitated. Within a month, her house was sold. The money disappeared, and Rose was told she had to leave because the new owners were moving in. She had nowhere to go, no money. Her grandson would not return her calls. His wife had blocked her number. And Rose, too ashamed to tell anyone what had happened, had quietly moved into this storage unit with her clothes, a few photos, and her dignity in tatters. Margaret listened with tears streaming down her face. Robert's jaw was clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grinding. When Rose finished, Margaret took both of the old woman's hands in hers. "Rose," she said firmly, "this ends today. You are coming with us. We are getting you out of here, and we are getting your house back." Rose shook her head. "You cannot. It has been sold. It is gone." Robert spoke up. "We have lawyers who specialize in this. If that power of attorney was fraudulent, the sale can be reversed. And even if it cannot, we will make sure you have a home. A real home. You will never sleep in a storage unit again. I promise you that." It took 4 months, but the foundation's lawyers proved the power of attorney had been forged. Rose had never signed it. Her signature had been traced from an old birthday card. The sale was voided. The house was returned to Rose, and her grandson was charged with fraud and elder abuse. He served 18 months in prison. But more than that, Rose became part of the foundation's family. She volunteered in their Tennessee office once it opened. She spoke at events. She shared her story, and she became one of Margaret's closest friends. They talked on the phone every week, visited each other several times a year, and when Rose passed away peacefully at 91 in her own home, the home that had been returned to her, Margaret spoke at her funeral. "Rose taught me something," Margaret said to the crowded church. "She taught me that it is never too late to fight back." She was 84 years old, living in a storage unit, and she still had the courage to ask for help. And because she did, we saved her. But really, she saved us too. She reminded us why we do this work every single day. Back in Oregon, they kept the cabin. They reinforced the structure, added solar panels for electricity, drilled a well for clean water. It became their retreat. The place they went when the world felt too heavy. And slowly they began to build a community around it. It started with Frank, the the mechanic from Pinehurst. He had helped them when they first arrived, given them directions, asked nothing in return. Robert hired him to maintain the property. Frank was in his early 60s, a widower who had been drifting since his wife died. Working at the cabin gave him purpose. He and Robert spent hours together, fixing the old truck Marcus had left behind, cutting firewood, building a new shed. Frank became like the son Robert wished he had. Then there was Helen, the sheriff who had helped them when Daniel tried to intimidate them. She was nearing retirement, tired of politics and bureaucracy. Margaret and Robert funded a community safety program she had always wanted to create, focused on protecting vulnerable seniors in rural areas. Helen threw herself into it. She trained volunteers, she created check-in systems, she made sure no elderly person in the county felt forgotten. And she became a regular visitor to the cabin, bringing her grandchildren, sharing meals, becoming family. Jolene from the diner became another close friend. When her own mother was diagnosed with dementia and Jolene struggled to afford care, Margaret and Robert quietly paid for a full-time caregiver. Jolene cried when she found out. She tried to refuse. Margaret would not let her. "You helped us when we needed it," Margaret said. "This is what family does." Gradually, the cabin became a gathering place. Frank would bring his tools and work on projects. Helen would stop by with fresh vegetables from her garden. Jolene would bring pies and coffee and stories. Other people from town started dropping by. The postal worker who delivered mail once a week, the couple who ran the general store, the young woman who worked at the library and loved to talk about books with Margaret. They were not connected by blood, but they were connected by something stronger. Kindness, respect, genuine care. They were chosen family, and for Margaret and Robert, who had been abandoned by their own children, this new family was everything. The seasons changed at the cabin in ways that marked time more beautifully than any calendar. Robert built raised garden beds and Margaret planted vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, squash, herbs. She had not gardened since losing their old house, and the feel of soil under her fingers brought back memories both painful and sweet. But here, in this place, the memories did not hurt as much. They just were. Frank taught Robert how to fish in the stream that ran through the property. They would wake before dawn, hike down to the water, and sit in comfortable silence while the world woke up around them. Sometimes they caught fish. Sometimes they did not. It did not matter. What mattered was the quiet, the peace, the sense that they had earned this moment. Helen's grandchildren, 2 girls aged 7 and 9, adopted Margaret as their honorary grandmother. They called her Grams Margaret and would run to hug her every time Helen brought them to visit. Margaret baked cookies with them, taught them to play cards, told them stories. And when the younger girl asked her one day why she did not have any grandchildren of her own, Margaret paused, then said gently, "I do now. You." The little girl beamed. "Really?" "Really," Margaret said, kissing the top of her head. And she meant it. 1 year after the inheritance, Daniel's trial began. The charges were serious. Fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse. The evidence was overwhelming. The deed transfer documents had forged signatures. The sale of the house had been orchestrated while Margaret and Robert were still legally the owners. Daniel had pocketed over $380,000 from the sale and spent it on his failing business and personal debts. His lawyer tried to argue that it was a misunderstanding, that Daniel had believed he was helping his parents, but the jury did not buy it. They saw the bank records. They heard Margaret's testimony. They watched the video of Daniel lying on television, calling his parents incompetent. The verdict came back in 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was set for 3 weeks later. Margaret and Robert were allowed to give victim impact statements. Robert went first. He stood at the podium, his hands shaking slightly. He looked at Daniel, sitting at the defense table in a suit that no longer fit quite right. Daniel would not look at him. "Your Honor," Robert began. "My son took more than money from us. He took our dignity. He took our sense of safety. He made us feel like we were a burden, like we did not matter. And then he tried to convince the world that we were the problem, that we were incompetent, that he was the victim." His voice grew stronger. "But we are not incompetent. We are survivors. And we want the court to know that this was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was calculated, this was cruel, and this has consequences. We ask the court to impose a sentence that reflects the seriousness of what he did, not just to us, but to every elderly person who has been abused by someone they trusted." Margaret went next. She was calmer, but her words cut deeper. "Daniel," she said, looking directly at him, "you were my firstborn. I held you when you were minutes old. I taught you to walk, to read, to be kind. And you repaid me by stealing my home and trying to steal my dignity." She paused. "I do not hate you, but I do not forgive you either. And I want you to know that every person we help through our foundation, every elderly victim who gets justice because we funded their legal battle, every senior who finds safety because we paid for their housing, they exist because of what you did to us. You meant to destroy us. Instead, you gave us purpose." Daniel finally looked up. His eyes were red. Margaret met his gaze and did not look away. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison, restitution of $380,000, and a permanent restraining order preventing him from contacting his parents. Patricia's trial was faster. Her real estate fraud was well documented. She had forged signatures on multiple contracts, not just her parents. She was sentenced to 4 years and lost her license permanently. Stephen was not criminally charged, but he lost everything anyway: his bankruptcy, his tax debt, the public shame. He moved to another state and disappeared from their lives completely. Margaret and Robert did not attend Patricia's sentencing. They had said what they needed to say. They did not need to watch her fall further. They just needed to move forward. 2 years after the inheritance, the foundation had helped over 400 people. They had funded 63 legal cases, all of which resulted in convictions or settlements. They had provided emergency housing for 92 seniors. They had trained over 200 advocates and social workers in recognizing and preventing elder abuse. And they had partnered with law enforcement agencies in 12 states to create task forces focused on prosecuting financial exploitation. The work was exhausting, but it was also healing. Margaret found herself smiling more, laughing. Robert's shoulders no longer carried the weight they once did. They were not just surviving anymore. They were thriving. One afternoon, while reviewing applications at the foundation office, Margaret came across a letter that stopped her cold. It was from a woman in Iowa named Catherine. She was 71 years old, and her story was hauntingly familiar. Her 2 sons had convinced her to sign over her farm, promising to care for her. Instead, they sold it, split the money, and put her in a nursing home. She had been trying to fight back for 2 years, but had no money for lawyers. Margaret called Catherine that same day. When the woman answered, her voice was tired, defeated. "Hello." "Catherine, this is Margaret Harrison from the Harrison Foundation. I read your application. I want you to know that we are going to help you. You are going to get your farm back." There was silence on the other end. Then Catherine started sobbing. I thought no one would believe me. My own sons told everyone I was senile, that I did not know what I was doing. "I believe you," Margaret said firmly, "because the same thing happened to me, and we are going to make this right." The foundation assigned their best lawyer to Catherine's case. It took 8 months, but they proved the sons had used coercion and undue influence. The farm sale was reversed. Catherine got her land back, and her sons were prosecuted for elder abuse, but the story did not end there. Catherine, reinvigorated by her victory, turned her farm into a retreat center for elderly abuse survivors. She partnered with the foundation to create a safe space where victims could come, heal, and learn about their legal rights. She called it Second Harvest Farm. Because everyone deserves a second chance. Margaret visited Catherine at the farm on a bright spring day. They walked through fields of new corn, the stalks just beginning to push through the soil. Catherine stopped and looked at Margaret. "You gave me my life back," she said. "I was ready to give up, ready to just fade away, but you showed me I still matter." Margaret hugged her. "You always mattered. You just needed someone to remind you." As they walked back to the farmhouse, Catherine said something that stayed with Margaret forever. "You know what the worst part of being abused by your children is. It is not the money. It is not even the betrayal. It is the shame, feeling like you failed as a parent, like you must have done something wrong to deserve it." Margaret nodded. "I felt that too," Catherine continued. "But you taught me something. You taught me that their choices are not my fault, that I can still build something good, that my story is not over." She smiled. "And now I get to teach other people the same thing." They also began traveling. Not extravagantly, but meaningfully. They visited the people they had helped. They spoke at conferences about elder abuse. They shared their story, not for sympathy, but to inspire others to fight back. And everywhere they went, people thanked them, hugged them, told them they were heroes. Margaret always corrected them. "We are not heroes," she would say. "We are just two people who refused to stay down." On the 3rd anniversary of Marcus's death, Margaret and Robert returned to the cabin for a private ceremony. They had invited only their chosen family: Frank, Helen, Jolene, and a few others. They gathered in the clearing in front of the cabin as the sun set through the trees. Margaret stood in the center of the group, holding a small wooden box. Inside was a portion of Marcus's ashes. The rest had been scattered in places he loved, according to instructions he had left. But Margaret had saved some for this moment. She opened the box and spoke. "Uncle Marcus, you gave us more than money. You gave us a second chance. You gave us the tools to fight back, to rebuild, to matter. And we want you to know that we did not waste it. We honored you. We honored ourselves, and we built something that will last long after we are gone." She scattered the ashes beneath the old pine tree near the cabin. Robert placed a small stone marker there. It read, "Marcus Eugene Walker, 1932 to 2025. He believed we deserved better. He was right." Everyone stood in silence for a moment. Then Frank cleared his throat. "I did not know Marcus," he said, "but I know what he left behind. Not just money. He left you two, and you changed this whole damn town." Helen nodded. "Before you came, Pinehurst was dying. Now we have hope. We have community. We have people who care." Jolene wiped her eyes. "You showed us what family is supposed to be. Not blood, not obligation, just love." Margaret felt tears run down her face. She reached for Robert's hand. He was crying too. They stood together, surrounded by people who had become their family, standing on land that had given them everything, and they felt something they had not felt in years. Peace. That night, after everyone had left, Margaret and Robert sat on the porch of the cabin. The stars were brilliant, unpolluted by city lights. Robert poured them each a glass of wine from a bottle Frank had brought. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Margaret spoke. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had not come here? If we had just ignored the letter?" Robert thought about it. "We would have been evicted. We probably would have ended up in some state-run facility. Separated, maybe. Our children would have gone on with their lives and never thought about us again. And instead," Margaret said softly, "we are here. We have millions of dollars. We have a foundation. We have people who love us." Robert smiled. "Funny how life works." Margaret looked at him. "Do you think the children ever think about us? Wonder what happened?" "Probably," Robert said. "I am sure they have seen the news stories about the foundation. I am sure they know we are fine. Better than fine. Do you think they regret it? Robert considered. Daniel might. Prison has a way of making you think. Patricia, I do not know. Stephen, maybe, but it does not matter anymore. They made their choices. We made ours. Margaret nodded. She sipped her wine. I do not hate them, she said. I did for a while. But now I just feel nothing, like they are strangers. Robert understood. That was worse than hate in a way. Hate meant you still cared. Indifference meant they no longer mattered. A few months later, Margaret received a letter. It was forwarded through the Foundation's office, screened by staff to make sure it was not a threat. The return address was a federal prison in California. Daniel. She stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Robert sat beside her. Do you want me to read it first? He asked. No, she said. I need to. She opened it carefully. Inside was 3 pages, handwritten, Daniel's handwriting, the same she had seen on birthday cards and school assignments decades ago. She read aloud, Mom and Dad, I do not expect you to read this. I do not expect you to forgive me. But I need to say it anyway. I am sorry. I know those words are not enough. I know they do not fix anything, but they are true. I was drowning. My business was failing. I had debts I could not pay. And instead of asking for help, I took from you. I convinced myself it was okay, that you would be fine, that I was protecting the family. But I was lying to myself. I was selfish. I was cruel, and I destroyed the people who loved me most. I watch the news in here. I have seen what you built, the foundation, the people you have helped. And I am proud of you. I know I do not have the right to be, but I am. You took what I did to you and turned it into something good. You did not let it break you. I wish I had been strong like that. I wish I had been the son you deserved. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, and that I understand now what I took from you. It was not just money. It was trust. It was love. It was family. And I will regret it for the rest of my life. I hope you are happy. I hope you are at peace. You deserve it. Daniel. Margaret folded the letter slowly. Her hands were steady. Robert watched her. What do you feel? He asked. She thought about it. Sad, she said. Sad that it took him losing everything to understand. Sad that this is where we are. But also relieved. Relieved. She nodded. Because now I know he understands. He knows what he did, and that is enough. I do not need to forgive him. I do not need to let him back into my life, but knowing he understands, it closes something. Robert took her hand. Do you want to write back? No, she said. There is nothing left to say. She put the letter in a drawer and did not look at it again. Some doors, once closed, did not need to be reopened. But 3 months later, another letter arrived. This one from Stephen. It was shorter, messier, written on notebook paper with crossed-out words and ink smudges. Mum, Dad, I know I have no right to write to you. I know I was a coward. I let Daniel and Patricia convince me that what we were doing was okay. I told myself I was just going along to keep the peace. But I knew. I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. I have lost everything. My marriage, my job, my self-respect, and I deserve it. But I cannot stop thinking about you. About how we left you with nothing. About how we did not even check to see if you were okay. I am not asking for forgiveness. I needed you to know that I am sorry, that I think about you every day, that I wish I could go back and be the son you raised me to be. Stephen. Margaret read this letter alone. Robert had gone into town with Frank for supplies. She sat at the kitchen table in the cabin, the letter in her hands, and cried. Not for what was lost, but for what could have been, for the sons she had loved and raised and believed in, for the family that had shattered. When Robert came home, he found her at the table, the letter beside her, her eyes red. He read it without a word. Then he sat down next to her and took her hand. Do you want to respond to this one? he asked gently. Margaret wiped her eyes. I do not know. Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to tell him it is okay, but it is not okay. What they did, it is not okay. You are right, Robert said. It is not. But that does not mean you cannot acknowledge his apology. You do not have to forgive. You do not have to forget. But you can. Close the circle. Margaret thought about it for days. Finally, she wrote back. 1 page. Dear Stephen, I received your letter. I appreciate your honesty and your apology. What you and your siblings did caused us tremendous pain. It destroyed our trust and our sense of family. And while I understand you are sorry, I cannot welcome you back into my life. Too much has been broken. But I want you to know that I hope you find peace. I hope you learn from this. I hope you become the man you are capable of being. And I hope that one day you can forgive yourself, because I cannot do it for you. Take care of yourself, Mum. She mailed it and never heard from Stephen again. She hoped the letter gave him some kind of closure. It gave her some. 5 years after the inheritance, Margaret was 73 and Robert was 75. The foundation was thriving. They had expanded to 15 states. They had helped over 2,000 people. They had changed laws in 6 states, strengthening protections for elderly victims of financial abuse, and they had created a network of advocates, lawyers, and social workers who carried on the mission. But Margaret and Robert were slowing down. The travel was harder, the long meetings exhausting. They began to talk about succession planning, about finding the right people to lead the foundation when they could not. James, now a close friend as well as their attorney, helped them identify candidates. They chose carefully, people who had lived through abuse themselves, people who understood the mission not as a job but as a calling. They built a board of directors. They created an endowment that would fund the foundation in perpetuity. And slowly, they began to step back. They spent more time at the cabin. Frank had moved into a small house nearby and became the de facto caretaker. Helen retired from the sheriff's office and started a consulting business helping rural communities protect their elderly residents. Jolene's mother passed away peacefully, and Jolene sold the diner to spend more time with her grandchildren. But they all still gathered at the cabin, every Sunday, for dinner, for conversation, for family. One Sunday evening, as they all sat around the fire pit Frank had built, Robert raised his glass. To Marcus, he said, for seeing something in us we did not see in ourselves. Everyone raised their glasses. To Marcus. And to all of you, Margaret added. Because family is not who you are born to, it is who shows up, who stays, who cares. And you are the best family we could have ever hoped for. There were tears, there were hugs, there was laughter, and as the fire burned down to embers and the stars wheeled overhead, Margaret felt something she had never expected to feel again. Complete, whole, loved. 7 years after the inheritance, on a crisp autumn morning, Robert passed away in his sleep at the cabin. He was 77. It was peaceful. He had gone to bed the night before after a good meal, a glass of wine, and a long conversation with Margaret about their plans for the week. He simply did not wake up. Margaret held his hand and cried. But through the tears there was gratitude. Gratitude that he had not suffered, that he had lived long enough to see justice, to build something meaningful, to be surrounded by love. Frank found her there and called Helen. Within an hour, the cabin was filled with their chosen family. They sat with her. They grieved with her. They made sure she was not alone. The funeral was small, but packed. People came from all over. People the foundation had helped. Advocates they had worked with. Strangers whose lives had been touched by their story. Margaret stood at the front of the small church in Pinehurst and spoke. Robert was a good man, she said. He was a machinist, a husband, a father once, though his children did not deserve him. And in the end, he was a builder. He built a life from nothing. He built a foundation that will help people long after we are all gone. And he built a family, not from blood, but from love. She looked out at the faces. "If you want to honor Robert, do not send flowers. Do not feel sorry for me. Instead, go out and help someone. Stand up for someone who cannot stand up for themselves. Be the person Robert was. Be kind. Be fierce. Be just." They buried him in the small cemetery outside town, next to the plot Margaret had already purchased for herself. The headstone was simple. Robert James Harrison, 1950 to 2027. He refused to stay down. Margaret lived another 3 years. She continued working with the foundation, though at a slower pace. She wrote a book about their experience, titled The Weight of Gold, a story of betrayal, survival, and legacy. It became a bestseller. The proceeds went to the foundation. She gave interviews, she spoke at events, and she made sure that Robert's name was always mentioned alongside hers. "We did this together," she would say, "every bit of it." On her 76th birthday, surrounded by Frank, Helen, Jolene, and dozens of others at the cabin, Margaret made an announcement. "I am stepping down from the foundation," she said. "It is time for younger, stronger people to lead. But I am not disappearing. I will still be here, still helping, still fighting, just differently." The foundation's new director, a woman named Claire who had once been a victim of guardianship abuse and was now a fierce advocate, stepped forward. "We will honor everything you built," she said. "We promise." Margaret smiled. "I know you will." That night, Margaret sat alone on the porch of the cabin. She looked up at the stars and spoke to the people who were no longer there. "Marcus," she said softly, "we did it. We took what you gave us, and we made it matter. Thank you for believing in us." "Robert," she continued, "I miss you every day, but I am okay. We are okay. Everything we built is still standing. I will see you soon." She closed her eyes. The wind moved through the trees, and for a moment she could swear she felt Robert's hand in hers, could hear Marcus's quiet voice. "You did good. You did real good." Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep on a summer night at the cabin, surrounded by photos of the people she loved, 3 months shy of her 77th birthday. She left specific instructions. Her ashes were to be scattered with Robert's and Marcus's beneath the pine tree. Her estate, what remained of the fortune, all of it, went to the foundation. And the cabin was to be preserved as a retreat for elderly abuse survivors. A place of healing, a place of hope. At her funeral, the church was so full people stood outside. Frank gave the eulogy. He was 81 now, his voice rough with age and grief. Margaret Harrison, he said, was the strongest person I ever met. She was knocked down by life, by her own children, and she got back up. She did not just survive. She built an empire of kindness. She changed laws. She saved lives. She showed us all what it means to turn pain into power. He paused, wiping his eyes. "And she taught me that family is not about blood. It is about showing up. It is about love. So if you want to honor Margaret, show up for someone, love fiercely, fight injustice, and never, ever give up." The Harrison Foundation continued to grow. Over the next decade, it helped over 15,000 people. It changed laws in 32 states. It trained thousands of advocates, and it became a national model for elder abuse prevention and victim support. The cabin became a pilgrimage site. People would drive hours just to see the place where 2 ordinary people had discovered an extraordinary fortune and used it to change the world. On the 10th anniversary of Marcus's death, the foundation held a special ceremony at the cabin. Hundreds of people attended. Survivors, advocates, lawyers, social workers, people whose lives had been changed by Margaret and Robert's work. They unveiled a bronze statue in the clearing. It depicted Margaret and Robert holding hands, standing together, looking forward. The plaque beneath it read, "Margaret and Robert Harrison." They turned betrayal into purpose and taught us all that family is built on love, not blood. Speeches were given. Tears were shed. Stories were shared. And as the sun set through the pine trees, casting golden light across the clearing, everyone gathered beneath that old pine where Marcus and Margaret and Robert's ashes had been scattered. They stood in silence for a moment. Then, as if on cue, someone started singing Amazing Grace. Others joined in. The sound rose through the trees, carried on the wind, a hymn of gratitude and remembrance. Daniel was released from prison after serving 4.5 years. He moved to a small town in Montana and got a job as a mechanic. He never contacted the foundation, never tried to reconcile. He lived quietly, alone, working with his hands. Some say he found peace. Others say he never forgave himself. Either way, he was no longer part of the story. Patricia was released after 3 years. She moved to Florida and disappeared from public life. Stephen remained a ghost. No one knew where he ended up. And no one in Margaret and Robert's chosen family cared to find out, because the story was never really about them. It was about 2 people who refused to let betrayal define them, who took a 75-cent cabin and a buried fortune and built something that would outlive them, who proved that sometimes the people who hurt you the most give you the greatest gift, the gift of purpose. The foundation expanded internationally, opened offices in Canada, the UK, Australia, partnered with organizations fighting elder abuse worldwide, created scholarships for law students focusing on elder law, funded research on financial exploitation, and every year, on Marcus's birthday, the foundation gave out the Walker Awards, recognizing individuals who had shown extraordinary courage in fighting back against abuse or who had dedicated their lives to protecting vulnerable seniors. Rose from Tennessee received the first Walker Award. Catherine from Iowa received the second. And year after year, the awards went to people who embodied the same spirit that Margaret and Robert had shown. Fighters, survivors, builders. And in Pinehurst, the little logging town that had once been dying, new life bloomed. Businesses opened, young families moved in, the school expanded, and everyone knew the story. Knew that 2 elderly people had come to town with nothing, found everything, and shared it with the world. Frank lived to be 89. He passed away in his sleep in the little house near the cabin. He left a note saying he wanted his ashes scattered with Margaret, Robert, and Marcus. The family honored his wish. Helen lived to be 92, sharp as ever, still fighting for seniors until her last day. Jolene made it to 87. And when each of them passed, they were mourned not just as friends, but as pioneers of a chosen family that had changed everything. The cabin still stands, maintained by the foundation, used as a retreat center where abuse survivors come to heal, to learn, to rebuild. There is a waiting list years long, because people want to walk the same ground Margaret and Robert walked, want to sit beneath the same trees, want to feel the same hope. And on quiet nights, when the wind moves through the pines and the stars fill the sky, people swear they can feel them there. Margaret, Robert, Marcus, Frank, Helen, all of them, watching, protecting, reminding everyone who visits that betrayal does not have to be the end, that pain can become purpose, that family is not about blood, it is about love. Anyone can turn betrayal into power if they refuse to stay broken. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories that will move you. Click now to keep the journey going and hit subscribe if you believe that real family is built on love, not blood.